Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today's story is about one woman reminding other women just how capable they are. Around the same time that today's guest was born, George Megan was setting a world record as the first person to walk from the southernmost tip of South America to the northernmost point in Alaska. 35 years later, today's guest, Lucy Barnard, decided that she would be the first woman to complete that journey. She's talking to us today from Oaxaca, Mexico, which means she's already made it through the South American portion of her journey. Lucy, who is from Australia, started her walk of the length of the earth in February 2017 in Ushuaia, Argentina. She's already traveled almost 15,000 kilometers, averaging 45,000 to 65,000 steps per day, and she's worn out 15 pairs of shoes. She's walking with her friend and companion, an Australian cattle dog named Wombat. Lucy has an infectiously joyful spirit, which I think has provided her the fuel to help keep her going. I'm so excited to share her journey so far, where she's been, where she's going, and what's happened along the way. Lucy, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you. I'm like, who's that girl?
You just keep walking. You don't even know. You're just going and going and going, and you got all these people watching you.
Honestly, and the thing is that's the whole secret. I'm just strolling my way over to the next town. I don't actually think of the whole feat itself. So when I hear an introduction like that, I'm like, what was I thinking?
You are somebody that people want to watch and somebody that is inspiring others. I wonder, just for to bring listeners up to date, you and I had such a good conversation the other day, and I've been all over your website, watching your YouTube videos, watching your social media, following this journey. But for those that aren't familiar, can you kind of bring us up to speed here on this trip that you have embarked on?
Oh, yeah, sure. In following George, I started in the bottom of Argentina thinking that I wanted to really match what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the very bottom, it's an archipelago, so a nice small group of islands. And it was really cold kind of climate. Right, really, that's where the boats leave to go to Antarctica. So you can get the idea that there was snow and there's lots of glaciers and it's just really beautiful. So I hiked through into the national park, crossed into the Chilean border, and then it commenced after maybe 3 or 5 days walking. I started a kayaking section, which was probably one of the biggest highlights because I just didn't realize what I'd be kayaking past. I'd done a lot of research, but you never really get it until you're there. And so I was kayaking alongside dolphins and elephant seals and whales and just constant penguins. I didn't expect to see penguins, and there were so many of them. They were like pigeons. And I had a bit of a rough start and lost a bag of food. So I was also really, really, really hungry. And one of the first towns I walked past once I hit the mainland was Puerto de Hambre, and that means it's like the port of hunger.
Oh my gosh.
Just to really rub it in.
Serendipity. I mean, that's storybook stuff.
Yeah. And so then I continued on towards Patagonia, which is very famous for its trekking. And it really lived up to that reputation. There were just the most beautiful mountains, and there were animals. Frequently, I'm talking pumas and humul, both which are threatened in that area. And for me, I felt like it was a real honor being there. As I started heading north, it stopped being an open tundra, like this vast nothingness, and started closing into more of a forest environment where I walked past these trees that have become famous because they have orange trunks and beautiful green leaves, and they sit alongside this glacial colored blue lakes that have little warning signs along them saying the water here is very deep and very cold. So people that jump in to swim go into shock and can die.
Oh, wow.
And then I went further north and got my first actual fear of the wildlife, because, you know, pumas are pretty timid, but there is a yellow jacket wasp that if it stings you will kill you. And when I saw signs for that, I was quite nervous.
Wow.
And then I meandered over into Chile and along the coastline, which for me was really homely because it meant that I was closer, or so it seemed, to Australia, because I was sharing the same ocean body. Very romantic. Until I hit the desert. And that's where I really, really suffered. I mean, I had been learning along the way because I'd never done through hiking or long distance hiking before I started this journey. But learning, you know, to survive minus 20 degrees Celsius and then landing in the hot desert, those two extremes are really challenging in terms of just getting my body comfortable and used to the climate. But I was really relieved. And I remember describing passing into Peru and climbing up into the Andes as being cured from some form of strange deafness, because for the first time in a really long time, I could hear the wind again and I could hear leaves rustling when there hadn't been any. And there was the most magical moment when I passed my first stream and I could just hear the water kind of sliding past me. And that feeling was something like gold for my soul. It was just beautiful. And from there on in, I was in the mountains, and the mountains are my favorite place. So I found the whole thing, despite all the sicknesses and injuries, really, really delightful. I would definitely hike through Peru and Ecuador again. And then since then, heading north, it's just been this really beautiful cultural exchange of learning the different languages that exist through South and Central America, and being welcomed and embraced and really cared for by a constant stream of people as I continue north.
Wow. So, okay. So that's pretty much all of South America and Central America at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you talked about, you know, extreme cold, extreme heat. You talked about running out of food, you know, all of that distance that you've covered and all of that different terrain. What are you carrying with you? How do you manage the preparedness for all of those different conditions?
Well, there is a joke about Australian hikers, which is that we ute pack. And a ute in Australia is like a truck in the States.
Yeah.
So we just get the heaviest stuff that will last us a lifetime, that's good quality, and we fill it. So when I started, I weighed 60 kilos and my backpack was 30 kilos. I
Okay.
had everything with me. It was ridiculous. And, you know, it really led me to wanting to quit a few times until I kind of started watching YouTube videos or just learning, you know, I haven't used this, and I think I might have had an opportunity or two
Yeah.
where I was able to leave some things with friends and they could look after it. And then I could really feel and sense the difference to my body without all of that extra weight. And so over time, I've really learned just to have the absolute essentials and nothing more.
Yeah, it's impressive. It really is. And so, like, how much of the time have you been, because I think that at times you've pulled a cart.
Yes, yes. So that was in the desert because there were stretches of 10 days where I wouldn't be passing any towns.
Yeah.
And so I had to carry all of my water. So I had a bunch of water bladders and I would put those over the wheel of the back of the cart. This is like, imagine a bike that's lost its front wheel and then you attach the handlebars to your hips. That's
Okay.
pretty much what it is. And then down the spine of it, you can put a big bag or boxes or whatever you want. I had a waterproof bag, not that I needed it in the desert, you know, wishful thinking.
Okay. So some of it you're backpacking, some of it you've got the cart.
The most of it has been backpacking, because for me, I get more joy out of having a backpack on my back and having the freedom to go wherever I want to.
Yeah.
And also for security, to be able to disappear as quickly as I want if I'm in trouble. But the cart was only because I was in a remote place where logistically I couldn't come across food and water easily.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're talking to you right now about halfway through this journey that you intend to make and will complete. It's an epic journey. I mean, it's 30,000 kilometers. I mean, everything that you just talked about, you just glossed over it, made it sound easy. There's so much I know that we're going to get into, that we're going to talk about, some of the highlights, some of the lowlights. But I'm really, really curious, before we even get there, I'd love to find out about the Lucy before this trip? Like, how did you develop and the adventure spirit that led you to be able to say yes to an adventure like this?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think the first thing that's important is that my personality as a child was that I was a bit of a rat bag. We weren't allowed to watch TV at home. I was the kind of student in school that teachers either adored or dreaded because I just was playful. I loved knowledge, but I watched the only thing that we were really allowed to watch at home were things like documentaries. So I'd always be contradicting the teachers and being like, well, actually, and they would just always be waiting for that moment with me. And I can see in hindsight how intolerable I could be. But basically a high energy kid. And somehow along the way, we're taught as children to do things for the experience.
Mhm.
But somehow along the way, I went into the career trap and really felt obligated to pursue a career. And I hadn't had a holiday as an adult on my own or with the groups of friends because I was just so concerned about money. At home, I had a school student debt, so I had to pay that off. And one day I just thought, I'm 30. I haven't been on a holiday. I think I'm going to go and just do it. So I saved up and I'd been a little bit fatigued from work as well. And I had hoped that maybe I'd go for a month leave and then be able to write in and say, I'm submitting my resignation and I'm going to have a year off. At home, we can do this thing where you can defer your job for a year
Okay.
if you're lucky. It's not like
Yeah,
standard.
yeah.
However, while I was away, I was in Argentina, which is actually where the idea came to me about walking the length of the earth. I was in that same environment I was describing before, this tundra, where there are no landmarks for you to get a bearing of the distance. And so I was in a bus and it just felt like I was driving for years and years and years, and I was never going to get to my destination. And surely to God, I could get there faster if I was walking. And then I was thinking, oh, can you walk it? And that led me down the rabbit hole of Googling to discover George Vegan and to discover that a few men have done a few variations of the walk, but no women. I went home realizing that I couldn't afford to stay on my holiday, but just having this little idea in the background, kind of whispering to me every so often. And I got back into work and I was working in media. So I was right near our director, and right in front of me was his executive assistant. And she asked me how it was, and she'd learned a little bit of Spanish and she was really excited to hear the whole thing. And I told her, I'd been a little bit sick. I hadn't been able to do all the things I'd wanted to do. I said to her, but I was reading about this thing about a guy who walked the length of the earth and no woman's done it. And I kind of feel like it's got to be doable, right? I'm like, it can't be that hard. So I'm sort of wondering if maybe that's what I should do and just take a few years out and get it done. And she just looked up at me with absolute assurity and determination, like that fierce look in her eyes. And she just said to me, Lucy, you have to do that.
I love
And it was that moment that I was like, okay, well, let's start saving. And so we hatched a secret plan at work and had milestone celebrations, and we just quietly together. She encouraged me. I made all the savings, did some research, had a nice group of adventurer friends around me to support me and to help me think of things that I might not have. And that was it.
Hey everyone, it's Scott here. Did you know that the members of my real estate team, W Realty Group, are listening to their own voices that call to adventure by setting big goals? Some of those goals include planning trips to Bali and the Kingdom of Bhutan, buying investment homes, and running the Chicago Marathon. At W Realty Group, we support and encourage these big goals and want to help turn them into reality. We're currently looking to add new members to the team. If you know a great real estate agent in the Charlotte, North Carolina area that would benefit from being part of our team, please send a text, an email, or give me a call. And know that when you support W Realty Group, you're also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening. I love this so much. So, Lucy, part of this podcast is this idea that, we have this voice inside that calls us to adventure. And, my hope is that people listening to others like you that have listened to that voice and then answered that call and stepped into it will also develop that ear to hear and then to be able to step into it. And so I just really appreciate the way that you just shared that. I'm curious. I have a couple things. I made some notes as we were talking here, but you talked about like you were an explorative kid, you were a curious kid, but and then you talked about stepping into the career track. I'm just what kind of work were you doing?
Okay, I studied science and communication and became a science translator or a science communicator.
Cool.
So at the time I came up with the idea, I was working in the medical field in an institute that researches Aboriginal health outcomes. And then by the time I set off, had moved on
Yeah.
and was working in a geology setting. So I worked at Geoscience Australia and I really love that work. I love celebrating the achievements of others and really getting their work out into the public and being utilised. So leaving was really hard for me. It wasn't just a matter of saying I quit and storming out. It was sad, but also a really supportive environment. And to this day, they occasionally include me in their meetings with a little map of where is Lucy.
I love that. I love that. Do you see yourself going back to that work at some point?
Well, actually, funny you say that because during COVID, I had to return to Australia. So I had 2 years off where I couldn't travel. They got in touch with me and had a job opening that they wanted me to sit in. So through that, I was able to recoup the money that I lost through getting back home. And I do love that work, but actually, my dream is to be an ethnographic writer and filmmaker. I want to be able to go into community, revisit some of the places that I've been and do two things. One, write a story that kind of encapsulates their journey into discovering happiness or the things that give them the most joy in life and sharing that with people and really taking the audience on a journey of like an emotional journey. And also at the same time running philanthropic projects to bring clean water to these places that I've been to that don't have clean water or fixing an issue for them with sponsors behind me. So I'm hoping that over the next 2 years, if I can build up a platform that's big enough to attract that kind of sponsorship, that's the big dream that I'm heading towards.
I love it. I love the pursuit of that. And I also just kind of look back to like the company that welcomed you back and continues to follow you and watch you. Like, no wonder, because I think people want to be surrounded by inspirational people like you that are out there doing this and doing it with that, like that smile right there. I mean, it's infectious. Your energy is so amazing.
I have to give you like a red flag here because I mean, obviously, I really practice a positive mindset while I'm hiking because I'm
Yeah.
alone and it's very easy for you to fall into the pity party. And that's what leads to people wanting to quit what they're doing.
Mm.
But actually, when I came up with the idea, there were a lot of people who would ask me why, and not like as in, oh, that's interesting. Why would you like to do that? It was kind of more like a why. Why would you do that?
Yes.
So very, very toxic, negative. And it's kind of just like, so what if I give this a go and I quit and I fail? Does it really matter? Does it affect anyone? It'll be a great story. It'll be hilarious. And also, it's just walking. Like, how hard can it be? Like, get off my back. But I was kind of sensitive, I was reformulating an identity, leaning towards more of the adventure world. I had a lot of male friends that I would go adventuring with and rock climbing with and all of that beforehand. But I'd never really been the person that initiated those ideas or those trips. So I was kind of vulnerable in the way that I was approaching it. And so I had to be very selective about who I told. And if anyone was ever negative, I just stopped talking to them about it completely because I knew that it was going to be too easy for me for it to be a phase. People love saying, oh, it was just her phase. I'm like, what's life for if it's not for phases?
Yeah. Well, what's cool about this? Like you talked about I heard you say the idea kept whispering, but when you shared it with your coworker that looked at you like very seriously and said, Lucy, you have to do this. Seems like that was the moment.
That was the moment. Margaret gets full credit because really she was the one that pushed me over the edge. There was no coming back after that.
Yeah. Thank you, Margaret. Oh man, that's so good. And so, I think that's just a really important point because if you like, what would have happened if you hadn't shared the idea with her?
Well, probably I would have just gone back to work, started saving, paid off my debts, and possibly fallen down the rabbit warren. Although I was really fortunate at that time in my life where a lot of my time and money was going towards these big weekend pursuits. So my friends and I would prepare our laundry on Wednesday, dry it on Thursday, have the car packed Thursday night, ready to go so that for as soon as we finish work on Friday, we could get out to a crag, go canyoning, go climbing, and then come back late Sunday night, ready for work on Monday, unpack the car Monday night.
Yeah, so you were the weekend warrior. You were adventuring quite a bit on the weekend. It's not like
A lot, but it wasn't off my own back. It was just because my brother, he's an adopted brother in my life,
yeah,
because he really drove it. Like, he had been a guide and he was really happy to teach me whatever he could and was very supportive. So I think I was very fortunate to fall into a group of people where there was this sense of psychological safety to not
yeah.
know something and to learn it from others.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So all of that adventuring that you did, even if it was just a weekend at a time, how mentally and physically ready did you feel for this adventure when you started?
When I got there, I was mentally terrified because I always had leaned on other people,
Yeah,
like I was always just saying yes to other people's ideas.
yeah,
So that was a big leap for me. But physically, I was competing in cycling races. I was rock climbing almost every night. And then on the weekends, I was running 5K in the morning after going to the gym and doing weight sessions because I just wanted to keep up with the boys. My male friends are super, super, like those super fit types who don't even have to do anything to maintain it. They are just strong and fast. And it killed me that they would have to carry my wet pack out of a canyon, because even when they were carrying my stuff, I still couldn't keep up. And even then, they would race to the top of the mountain. Like, it
yeah.
just drove me nuts. So I was really fit, really ready, but I just had to calm myself, know that I had the ability, really focus on just one step at a time, and take a leap of faith.
Yeah. So you shared the story of, going to Argentina for a holiday and going down this rabbit trail and learning about George Megan. And I get that. But I'm wondering if there was something like even deeper than that triggered, because you could have adventured in a lot of different ways, but this is what you chose. And I'm just wondering if there was something kind of that triggered this particular adventure you talked about, that whisper, like what was it that was fueling that whisper?
I guess you could say, growing up, my mum really wanted my sisters and I to be independent.
Mhm.
And so we used to do little things at home, like tell each other that, girls are just as good as boys, girls can do anything that boys can, because they're really, as a kid growing up, I didn't see any sports on TV where it was the women. I always used to watch the Ironman races, which is kind of like triathlon, but beach setting,
Yep.
more of a beach setting. And I can still to this day tell you the people that I idolized, but they were all men because there were no women. At some point, probably through mum's feminism training, I became quite sensitive to noticing when something had been accomplished by a man and not a woman, because ultimately it is that gap where you can't be what you can't see, that expression. There is really some weight to that. Obviously, it's been well studied. I'm not a researcher on it, so I
Yeah.
won't talk too much to it. But that was the trigger, seeing that they had so much time had passed,
Yep.
and knowing, for example, that my nieces would have this example sitting as evidence that there really is a gap in the ability of men and women, when truly there isn't. There is physically, but it's something like 3%. It's like completely irrelevant, or it's not a satisfying reason for someone to not want to try something.
It's very dialed in. I mean, one of the quotes that I was going to read on your website, this is directly from you, says, "Above everything else, I'd like to contribute towards how women are revered by our children."
Yeah, yep. And I have nephews now too. And I think it's really important. Well, first of all, in the Australian context, when they did a survey recently about whether people believed that there was a gender gap or not, a third of the men surveyed said that there wasn't one. And so it just kind of shows, when there's so much evidence that there is, that we have a long way to go. And yet all of the people that I'm surrounded by, men and women, we're all constantly talking about this and trying to make sure that women are seen. And you can see it in sport now, that women are getting the same pay, there's getting more airtime. In fact, with the soccer last year, it got more the female sport got more airtime than the male. Like, it's just like, we really are in a really vibrant time where things are changing in the outdoors and in the adventure industry, and I'm eager to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, and along those lines, when we spoke, you said to me that you kind of, the way that you sort of think about adventure is that you always want philanthropy to be a part of it. And so I wondered
Yeah,
if you
to
could
be
kind of
honest.
elaborate on that a little bit. I can only presume that it kind of ties to what we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, not in the sense with the gender stuff, I just feel like I'm here, I'm in this space, and I'm trying to take up
Yeah.
some of the podium, right? So that's all in the background. But what I really focus on is one of my big goals is to have a foundation where I can provide a sponsorship or a grant each year to a child who isn't thriving at school. Because for me, when I was at school, it was always for the elite students. So I would
Mm.
really like to see a sponsorship where I could take a kid that's not performing well and bring them into a really cool adventure.
Yeah, I love that.
Gender not important, it's just
Yeah.
all about opportunity for people that aren't necessarily seen as having them. And that is something that really brings me into the idea of then going on these adventures and going into community and doing those community projects. Because again, when you're not seen and you're not in the limelight ever, it's really hard to get assistance because the problem isn't being seen by the general public. And so I just feel like, to me, that's a really satisfying way to close the loop on a career that involves this new format of working online as well as being in adventure and then doing something that serves the future generations in a positive way.
Yeah. So, how has that sort of philanthropic desire to help less seen kids, as you just talked about, how has that kind of shown up for you in the 15,000 kilometers that you've already walked?
I'm such a sucker. I don't even want to admit to this because I know that then I'll get a whole bunch of emails from teachers. But I do attend, I'm not going to name them, but I attend certain online forums where I present to children at schools and answer their questions and talk about all of the things that I'm getting up to. And I just, for example, wrote 40 emails to all these little school children that wrote me emails last week. And I really do try and keep engaged with them. But that's not where, for me, it's not all about kids, Like I also, when someone doesn't know how to go hiking, or when someone writes to me because they're thinking about doing something but they're not sure where to start, I always try my very best to give them some time, because I know that for me, I needed Margaret, and I think everyone needs a Margaret when they're doing something that's outside of their scope of normal.
Yeah. You're a people person.
Yeah, totally.
You like to be with people, you like interacting with people. But I wanted to get into some of the highlights of your trip, and I feel like this is a good time to talk about your experience in the desert.
Oh my gosh.
Because
Yeah.
another quote from your website, you were in the desert. Well, I'll just read what your post said. The solitude became apocalyptic. So desperate I became for human contact, I began drawing out conversations in a way that brushed against lunacy, just so I could spend more time with people. And I just really want to talk with you about that.
The first time that happened, where it was really notable, was when I was down in the south on those first days hiking alone. But then it was very, very obvious in the desert. And back then I didn't know, like I hadn't worked out the limit of my phone and if I could listen to podcasts or books like I do now. I listen to them all of the time, so I don't really suffer from loneliness anymore. But that was really hard. So if someone saw me walking and they were driving along a road or something, I would veer nearer to the road just in case they stopped. And they always did, because they always wanted to know if I needed water or if I
Yeah.
was okay. And I couldn't, the big part of this too is that I have these interchanges, but I couldn't speak Spanish either. Like all of the Spanish that I've learned is just along the way on the
Yeah.
street. And from Peru up, in fact, mostly because I've been remote, they've been indigenous languages, so they haven't even been Spanish.
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to have these conversations. I haven't, because of the security and making sure that I don't put myself into a vulnerable position, no one ever touches me or comes close to me. And so this feeling of complete isolation weighed on me so much. Even now, when I have friends come and visit, I will like lean on them and touch them a lot because I really miss that input. But yes, the desert was just, I mean, not only is the climate difficult, but the solitude was really, really tough. And yet the people there, despite being warned off them and being told that they're not to be trusted, which, gave me a bit of nerves in the beginning of that
Sure.
area, they were the most concerned, the most caring. They would go out of police went 300 kilometers out of their way to make sure that I had water and then return again. Like everyone really wanted to make sure that I was okay. Every time I arrived into a town, someone offered to wash my clothes, someone bought me an ice cream, someone cooked me lunch. It was just insane. And they would just be that they saw me with a backpack, or they saw me with the cart, or they knew about me because everyone talked to each other about, hey, have you seen this girl walking through the
Yeah.
desert?
I was gonna ask you that, but I mean, do they know because of social media, or is it just the words just spreading organically, or yeah.
Organic. It's all organic. I must say, when I was in the snow, which was also very isolating, but I didn't have time to be lonely because I was too busy not being, trying not to be cold. There, I did use Facebook ads back in the day when you could really target them. So I sent the Facebook ads to people who were employed in the trucking industry in the Patagonia area. And I said something like, this chick, and this is in Spanish, this chick is walking the length of the earth. If you see her, say hello. Well, everyone stopped. It was great.
So I'm curious, like, just to go back to that period of solitude, and particularly in the desert. Like, I just wonder, for listeners, could you share what that, like, visceral experience was like? What did the solitude feel like?
Oh, just a deep sense of emptiness. And it wasn't just, I really was lacking visual simulation as well, because it got to the point where it was so hot that
Mhm.
I was walking from 4 p.m. in the afternoon all the way through the night until 10 a.m. And by 10, the heat was too hot, and I'd have to find somewhere. Often there are memorials or tunnels under the roads where I could go and lie. And it would be so cold in those spaces in comparison to outside that I'd pull my sleeping bag out. And I knew where they all were because I was watching for them on satellite data and marking them in my map. So I had very specific goals. So there was this constant worry. I need to get to this place before 10. So there was this stress. There was no one to talk to. There was no one to check in with to make sure that I was tracking okay. And I've had a puppy with me that I needed to make sure was safe. Of course he was. I'd done my due diligence, but then there was also this lingering fear in the background that people on social media were going to come down on me and tell me
Mm.
that I'm being cruel, all of that. And so I just remember living by my wristwatch and just starting to hike. And then as soon as I'd walked a few hours, I would try and find a moon shadow to lie in so that I had darkness to sleep, because the moon is so bright in the desert that you don't need a torch, a flashlight. My feet used to just be in agony because the ground it's not a soft desert, it's hard stone. And occasionally, and it was just always really difficult. So if my feet weren't hurting from the hard stone, then my core was hurting, because in parts of the Atacama Desert, there's this type of fake rain where early in the morning the mist rises and then it falls again. It's not rain, it's called something that I've forgotten now. And then all of that and just nothing, just ultimate loneliness. I'd never do it again.
Oh, you never do it again. Well, I'm curious what sort of strategies you used to get through the mental part of that.
Clock, just my wristwatch, which actually interestingly is something that people who survive report being the thing that got them through, where you're just setting times to get to and then counting whatever it is that you can count. And that's exactly what I would do. I'd count kilometers, I'd count meters, I'd count signs. I would try and think of things that I would want to do in the next town. But ultimately, it was just sheer determination. I knew that the sooner I got to the north, the better, the sooner I'd be out of it.
Yeah.
I had family visiting at the end of that year, so I knew that I just needed to get to Eureka and then I could go and see my family. I guess by that point too, I was just like, giving myself permission to quit has been something that's been really important to me. So there was a time in the South where I quit and I was just never going back, and I was certain of it. And then I recovered and I kept going. And that happened in the desert as well, where I was just like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to get to this top town. And when mum gets here, I am going to just tell her that I'm coming home with her and she'll be really thrilled.
Yeah.
But then time heals all wounds. And we had a great holiday, and I was like, I'm all right. I'll keep going, see how I go. And if I want to quit, I'll just walk to the airport in Lima, Peru, and fly home from there.
Well, I love that you brought this up, because one of the things that we talked about the other day was just like hiker culture in general, and just kind of this idea of like other people's expectations about what's what's appropriate ways to hike, right? And what's okay and what's not. And you have like a really, I feel like a very free and inspiring sort of philosophy on it. So I just wonder if you could kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that recently I've been looking more and more on YouTube as I'm trying to learn to grow my own channel. And I have seen comments on pages about what qualifies someone to being able to claim that they've hiked a trail. And for a layman or someone who isn't really deep into the through hiking world, to say I've walked the PCT or I've through hiked the PCT doesn't come with rules. It's like if you're in the Antarctica world, which one day I'm hoping to be a part of a project that we're planning for the future, where if you're unsupported, it means you have maps, but you don't use any trails, you don't use the road. No one calls you, you don't speak to anyone outside of the team during the expedition, you don't use dogs, you ski the whole thing, you don't use, like, everything that you do is self-supported. And if there's any contact from the outside world, you're disqualified, right? So it's like absolutely finessed, and there's a rule, and going into that environment that if you use the word unsupported, that's what it means.
Got it.
So I think though that because hiking is so popular, if you use the word through, I've through hiked the states, I went along the Appalachian Trail, but you didn't quite do the whole trail, but you might have done a variation. Or if there was a bushfire and you had to skip that section, sometimes that's okay and it's still counted, but sometimes it's not. Or if you're hiking along a road, I mean, if I could skip the road sections, obviously I'm doing a world record, so I can't. But if I could, I would hope that I would, right? But in the comments that I read about this topic, people get very upset when people say they've through hiked a certain trail and they might have skipped 30 kilometers. And to me, I just think, well, who are we to demise the achievements of other people, really? I mean, if they hiked it, they hiked it. What's it matter to you other than your own insecurities about whether or not you have secretly skipped something? Or, better yet, it's just, to me, I would really hope that just because someone's done a hike or a variation of a hike you've done, that you don't feel like that is diminishing your hike because you did it tougher. And I think the other day we were talking about how for some people, we're not all born on the same page, like for some people, they can't afford all the gear, the lightweight equipment, etc. So at what point are you really doing it when you have freeze-dried meals and things that are making it easy for you that other people can't have for themselves? And so to measure yourself up against other people, I feel is really toxic. And I think that when someone pushes themselves to the edge and they have to stop and they have to make that decision to quit, I think that's more admirable in ways than people that gloat about achieving the full hike, because you never really reached your breaking point. You didn't ever get to the point where you were suffering so much that you had nothing left in the tank. And I think for someone to have maybe gotten almost there but stopped, for them, I feel like it's better for them to claim that they've hiked that trail because they were the ones that were really truly in the arena.
I love that. And I really appreciate it, especially the other day. And you just repeated it now, but like you talked about like how it's almost more admirable for a person that gets to their breaking point rather than the person that's able to just go all the way through without actually finding out what their breaking point is.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about being in the outdoors and seeking joy and doing something that's not necessarily professional. You're just doing it because you want to have a good life.
Yeah.
So why would we measure that? Why would we rate someone's experience against our own? I just feel like there is a trend at the moment in the hiking world where we're wrecking the culture of what it's meant to be like, what it's meant to be about.
Wrecking the culture. Can you go a little bit further on that one?
Okay, well, like in my experience at home, when you go hiking, you'll see a stranger and you're gonna have a chat with them, and they're gonna be like, "Hey, what snacks do you have? Do you have any? Would you like to share some food with me?" And there's like this exchange of joy, and hey, what have you seen? I've seen this, la 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 la, and it's this beautiful uplifting of the human spirit. I also can appreciate that when people are speed hiking and they're trying to do their own goals, that's really awesome too. But for me, the culture in hiking is this supportive humanity, this
Yes.
love, the idea of trail angels, and the idea of doing something that centers you back to what's important. and which ultimately happens when you are struggling or going through something difficult. Or maybe for you, you just want to do it because you love being outside and you want a casual walk and you're seeking joy. All of those things are totally appropriate to do in the outdoors. I think though it's inappropriate when you cross a line and you use your goals and your achievements to diminish those of others. I think that it's just completely out of line.
So I think what you're talking about includes kindness, compassion, and encouragement. And here's what I think. I think everybody needs a Margaret.
Everyone needs a Margaret.
Absolutely. And I think like the philosophy that you bring to your walk and to adventure in general, it speaks to just that. Everybody needs a Margaret, everybody needs encouragement. And you actually shared with me a little video summary of a philosopher named Heidegger, and I watched it and I thought that was really cool. And I just wondered if you could share a little bit about that philosophy and why it's important to you.
Yeah, I mean, the essential components of Heidegger, and I haven't watched the overview in a long time, so you might be able to help me out here. But essentially, it's about having a finite amount of time on this planet and accepting and acknowledging that you are going to die. So live your life the way that you want to, because anyone that criticizes you was never on your team in the first place. They're not your people. They never liked you. Just forget that they are there and do what you want to do and have the courage to be who you want to be. And for me, I have grown up with that kind of philosophy within my family, and I would hope that I have the courage to pursue the things that I want to be doing the most. And I would hope that of the future generation as well.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I got from that summary was, to strive for authenticity. And, even authenticity, it's like sometimes we do have to. Sometimes I feel like that I have to strive for authenticity because of the culture that we're in. It sometimes is work to like draw it out, but like once you find your unique self, that's what it's about.
Not to mention that social media has completely ruined the word authenticity. Like if you have to hashtag authenticity in a post, you're faking it. It's usually like I put this half naked photo up of myself because I wanted to have the bravery to be proud of my body. But like you never really see anyone doing that who isn't like babelicious.
Mm.
or it's just, it's really contrived posting this idea that there is never an imperfect part of your life when really it's more imperfect than not. Anyway, that word just grates me.
I gotcha. Well, I don't think we can have a conversation together that we're going to share with listeners without a little bit of discussion about your buddy Wombat. So So you did go through the desert. You experienced a great deal of solitude, but you did have a companion with you. Can you tell us about Wombat?
Firstly, 4 people start this expedition every year, and usually they all quit within the first year in Patagonia because it's so cold and windy and the terrain is just so difficult.
Yeah,
So I decided that knowing that I would wait a year before I started looking for a dog. I always wanted to get one. I felt like it would increase my security and also be a companion and just add the missing element to my walk.
for sure.
And so once I survived the first year and got through quitting and was feeling pretty positive, I started looking, and a farmer had 12 puppies and he wanted them to be assessed for personality traits. And I have been a volunteer at the guide dogs and have done a lot of work with puppies generally and knew how to do those little testings. They're not 100%, but you can do, if the dogs aren't known to you, you can go in and do a battery of tests that kind of will determine if that dog's a working dog or just a pet, or if it's going to be hard to train or easy, that sort of stuff. So I did that for them, and in return they gave me a puppy. And then I had the foolish mistake of having an election on Facebook to come up with a name for him, which caused a lot of fighting. But we ended up with Wombat.
I love it. So how much of the journey has Wombat done with you?
He has done the entire thing minus about 4,000
Okay.
kilometers.
Okay.
I would say 4,000 or 6,000 kilometers. He does really well. It means that I have to carry extra stuff. Sometimes he has a backpack, but he's never really carrying that much. So all his paperwork, I share food with him. I carry a first aid kit for him. All of that stuff comes along with me, and it's totally, totally worth it.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to share some photos of you and Wombat together on the show notes for people to be able to see you guys. What a sight to see. Y'all walking all through South America and now in Mexico. Where are you going from here?
Right. So this plan always changes because I've noticed one thing that is consistent about this walk is I make a plan and then it is ruined on pretty much the first day. However, I am about to continue north on the Northern Trans-Mexico track, which is a bikepacking track that you can learn about on bikepacking.com. It's really awesome. The website, great for adventure ideas.
Cool.
And then I will leave it early and head towards New Mexico because that trail goes to Baja California and I can't cross water crossings unless it's necessary. Like the way that I started on the island, I had to get to the mainland.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking that I'll land in New Mexico and then head north from there towards Banff in Canada. However, summers are quickly approaching and I don't know quite how I'm going to manage that, but it's a problem for later.
Okay, but you're going. You're just
Yeah.
checking away. So for listeners, how can people sort of follow your journey and find out more about you, and how can people support you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing right now is that I'm really trying to grow the platform for when I want to move into these bigger projects later down the line. And so I guess talking about it and following on Instagram or YouTube would be really handy. My brand is Tangles and Tail, which is talking about my messy hair and the dog tail that I have. So Tangles and Tail,
Nice.
or Lucy Barnard on YouTube. So I think that way is really helpful. If you are full of cash and you want to provide 5 or 10 Australian dollars a month, so that's like half in US, then I have a Patreon and that gives access to behind the scene content on Instagram. Otherwise, if you know of a big fat company that would like to buy a bridge for a community that doesn't have one,
Yeah.
or anything really. I mean, I'm always picking up tips and I'm always getting nice emails from people who, shed light on something that I have been missing for a long time. And actually, that's one reason I'm looking forward so much to getting to the States because I'm going to start learning how to actually hike in a way that's probably easier on the body. Better late than never.
So, Lucy, you have an incredibly inspiring story. This is a big undertaking. You are halfway through, you've got a long way to go. And I'm just curious for people that are listening to this that are really inspired by your story, but maybe can't imagine them taking on such a big challenge. For many, that thought might be like way too overwhelming or intimidating. And I'm just wondering, like, what encouragement would you have for those people that would like to adventure, but maybe aren't ready for a 30,000-kilometer trek?
Why? Why not? No, I would say set yourself up for success, like do something that you can do. Or if you want something that's really challenging and scary, then do it with someone who has the capability of doing it or sign up to with a guide or something along those lines. But ultimately, with this hike, and I think this is probably true for many people that goal set, I'm never thinking about the end game. I'm always just looking a week ahead. And that is the way that I've gotten from one place to the next. And I think also, if it's something you've never done before and you're concerned about judgment, then as we were saying before, don't talk to the anti-Margarets, talk to the Margarets. Like,
Talk to
be
the
really careful with who you tell, because for me, I was quite surprised with who really took to it and who didn't. Be prepared for it. And just ultimately, if you fail, it makes for the best story anyway. So just see how you go.
Yeah, and I want to just touch on what you just said because you said like you're really only thinking a week at a time.
Yeah.
And I think that's really helpful. Actually reminded me of what you said in the desert. You did the same thing in the desert and you were doing like minutes at a time or 10 minutes at a time. Like you were just chunking time.
Yeah, manageable chunks. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, when I'm walking somewhere beautiful, it's really easy to glide through. But when it's tough, yeah, it's really hard to break your brain away from the toughness of it. So for me, at least, counting it out is the best way.
It's a great share. So along the lines of this being such an epic journey, obviously Hollywood's going to make a movie about you at some point. And when they do, I want to know who's going to be the actor or actress that's going to play you in your movie.
Well, because we were talking about this before, and I was telling you that I don't know any famous people at all. I had a meeting in the hostel last night about this exact topic. And beyond saying that, I really would hope that if a movie was, because to me, I'm like, who would make a movie about it? How boring. Where if someone wanted to go down that line, one, I would really hope that the content wasn't sexualized. It was done by someone that had enough talent to just be humorous and playful and feminine and fine. Like
Yeah.
that would, to me, would be really awesome. And I think the general idea from last night was that, is it Emma Stone?
Emma Stone. Okay. Yeah.
I think she's like see, this is the thing, I just don't watch TV or anything, but I think she's like a really playful, fun,
For sure.
hopefully not too crazy person.
I think it's a great choice. Emma Stone. I love it. Lucy, what's the movie going to be called?
Well, hopefully I survive and it's not a tragic title. But I think something along the lines of Walking North, or some of the comments at the beginning, it'd be nice to have a title like I Am Not Lost.
Oh, yeah.
Because there were a lot of people, I can't believe people love to mother shame like this, but there were some people that commented to my mum when I started that they wondered what I was running away from, as though doing something for the joy or doing it just for the experience wasn't an acceptable answer to the why question. So
Yeah.
I like that one too.
I Am Not Lost. I love that. Starring Emma Stone. It's going to be a great movie. I'm definitely going to go see it. Lucy, your energy is so awesome. Best of luck on the rest of the journey. I know I'll be checking in with you, and can't wait to see when you get to the northernmost tip in Alaska. Remind me the name of the town that you're headed to in Alaska.
I'm heading to Utqiagvik. When George got there, George writes to me, by the way, whenever I post a vlog. He gives me a
how
letter.
cool.
Yeah, he's like, I can't believe you can do it these days. It's just so impressive. And I'm like, you didn't have GPS. Are you kidding me?
How cool that is. I got it. Like, you just brought that up before we go. Like, I want to, what is that like for you to be able to communicate with him? I mean,
It
he's
is
kind of the
so
inspiration for that.
cool. Like, I really hope that when I reach Utqiagvik, which was known as Barrow when he completed it,
Okay.
I hope that he can be there for the finish, because I
How
think that would
cool.
just complete the circle.
What a great way to finish our story together. I'm so glad that you shared that with us. Thank you so much for the time you spent with us today. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Lucy's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Lucy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.